Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discoveries, our discussions, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And that brings us to a release, or a re-release, I should say, of a title which already currently exists in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog. And such title is designated at spine number 490. And this is a work which, again, currently exists, for example, in a Blu-ray in the current physical media catalog. But this year, on this occasion of 2023, the Criterion Collection has re-released this title, this time employing the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo format. And I'm speaking of a work which is described as being from the year 1987. And the name of the filmmaker is Wim Wenders. And the name of the work is Wings of Desire. This is the work from the year 1987, and it is from the filmmaker and artist extraordinaire Wim Wenders, and it's credited as being written by Wim Wenders in collaboration with Peter Handke. And in fact, the writing process of this film, the creative process of this film, is a story in and of itself. It's a very fascinating creative process, which we'll touch upon a little bit later when we discuss the great supplements that are part of this Criterion release. But Wim Wenders and also other key members of the crew include, for example, the director of photography, Michael Atkinson. And when we speak of the great cast of players, it's such a wonderful gathering of great artists, great actors, included in which are, for example, Bruno Ganz and Otto Sander and Solveig Dommartin and Peter Falk and others. And I'm speaking once again of this great film. I'm glad it's re-released in the Criterion Collection in this fashion. Please pardon me for my poor pronunciation of the language. I hope you can forgive me, but it's Der Himmel über Berlin, or as it's known in English, Wings of Desire. So as I mentioned earlier, Wings of Desire already exists actually in the Criterion Collection. For example, I have in my hand here the Blu-ray, the earlier Blu-ray release. But this year, 2023, we see Criterion re-releasing this time based upon 4K restoration and also based upon or employing the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo physical media format. And we'll talk a little bit about those details a little bit later in this video discussion, if that's okay. But before we get to that, let us first talk about the plot or story structure of this film, Wings of Desire. It's a very clever and very fascinating, and it's a very inventive work that is also very emotionally rich and very stirring, and has a type of magical, uplifting feel about it. I think we can speak about the idea or conceit or concept involving Berlin and the observation of Berlin and the observation of the people and the thoughts and feelings of the inhabitants of Berlin. And this observation takes place from the vantage point of angels that we come to become associated with over the course of our watching of the film, and in particular, angels who are portrayed by Otto Sander and Bruno Ganz, respectively. So Cassiel and Damiel. And in fact, we see their process of observing and, to a certain degree, interacting with the people on Earth, the people who are the inhabitants of Berlin. And the people who live on Earth in Berlin, they cannot see the angels, they cannot sense their presence, but the angels can go down and walk among the people and listen to their thoughts and experience the world in a type of black and white observation manner. But that also reveals a type of limitation to the angel's ability to engage with and interact with, perhaps on an emotional level, with the people that they are observing. Yes, they are observing, but what there is a type of divide between how much they are able to observe and how much they are limited in terms of their engagement with the people down below. But in any event, we have this great application of this conceit of the angels observing the people down below, heaven and earth, and also the ability to listen in on the thoughts and feelings of the people as they are experiencing their lives. And we do meet, or we do observe, along with the angels, various people located within this landscape that is Berlin, late 1980s. And we get a sense of people living, say, their day-to-day lives, habitual routines. Maybe other people they're concerned about some pressing matters that they're confronting in that particular moment, or maybe even grave or dire or serious consequences that they're contemplating at a given moment, etc. So the whole range of lived-in experiences, I think, are represented in the various stories and episodes and people that we, together with our angel characters, are ourselves observing. And that's, I think, a wonderful way in which the film is employing the metaphor conceit of the heaven and earth angel and the angels and the people down below type of arrangement or structure, because we get a sense of that through, say, very cinematically applied stylings of, say, voiceover narration. We can hear what people are thinking, and indeed that also becomes extended to the powers of the angels themselves through their powers of observation. But also there is a type of divide, and this divide between heaven and earth is represented so cleverly by the application of the black and white photography and the color photography. So to put it simply, the black and white photography is applied where we have the perspective of the angels, the perspective of heaven, whereas the color photography is applied where we have the perspective of earth, the perspective of the people who are living in Berlin at the moment. And so with a few exceptions, perhaps, shall we say, but those are some of the great wrinkles and surprises and wonderful delights that await one when one is to watch this film, Wings of Desire, for the first time, or indeed upon rewatch, because those surprises and delights continue to surprise and delight upon rewatch and rewatch and rewatch along the way. So. But that's, I think, one of the great ways in which this film employs cinematic technique, photography technique, black and white and color, in a way that then further enhances or embellishes or buttresses this notion of, say, the concept of heaven and earth, and also the concept of a cool, reserved observational technique on the part of our angel characters, which has a type of magical, almost floating, ethereal quality to it that is very, very cool on the one hand. But I use the word cool purposefully because it's cool and reserved, and there is a distance that is shown through their inability to engage on a very, say, intimate emotional level, and also their inability to, say, engage on a corporeal level, let's put it that way. There's the ethereal level, but there's also the corporeal level, and that divide is represented so acutely and so perfectly and so wonderfully and so inventively with the application of the great photographic choices and techniques that are employed here. So cheers to Wim Wenders and Henri Alekan and others for that wonderful application of style. Now, I put it in those terms as well, in terms of the divide, in terms of, say, the ability to observe and to hear thoughts versus the inability to, say, engage on a kind of innately emotional or human level. And that divide is a very key one, because it also forms the impetus, or it also forms a type of a wonderful plot or subplot involving one of our angel characters. This is Damiel, the Bruno Ganz character, and the angel character, and his fascination, the angel's fascination with a particular human being that he observes. This is the Marion character, Solveig Martin character. And in essence, it becomes a type of love story, a love story between an angel who is observing and this young woman, this trapeze artist who, again, like many of the people on Earth, are not able to see the angels and not able to detect where the angels are. And so it has this almost sense of yearning or longing from the angel's perspective that is also a lovely type of childlike, innocent quality about it that enhances our sympathies with this particular character. And we see the possibility or impossibility of a further connection being had between this angel who is so fascinated with this young woman, and this young woman who has her own life and has her own set of, say, concerns and situations and feelings and thoughts and desires, both on the ground and in the air, because she is also, in a certain sense of the phrase, she's also someone who flies. And so therein lies a type of dilemma which is inherent with the so-called love story component of the film, or not so-called, but it is inherent with the love story component of the film, because this indeed is also among many things, it is a love story. And so we see the development of this love story, I think, unravel or proceed or evolve in a very, I think, clever way that is easy to access, that has a sense of magic and power, but also it has a real almost immediacy in terms of being able to access and understand. There are developments that happen which turn the, say, heaven and earth dynamic on its head. But it does so in a way that is also, I think, very, very sharp and witty, but also very much lending itself to a type of, say, keeping the spotlight on the earnestness and emotional, intimate connections between these characters. And again, the angel story as it progresses, how the angels will continue to be able to observe and to be able to further explore and discover and satiate their own curiosities about the lives and the people and the world that they are observing. And perhaps there might come a possibility that they can, hopefully, maybe, perhaps, possibly, get closer to this world and to these people than they had been up to now. And so that forms, I think, the basis for the further progress or evolution of the story Wings, or the stories Wings of Desire, because it is an assembly of stories that seem to blend together so well. When we talk about the specific characters that we made, I mentioned, the angel characters, and I mentioned some of the people that they observe. I should also mention Peter Falk, who has a very interesting and very memorable way in which he seems to figure in to this plot and the story and stories that are developing themselves. And then also I mentioned the idea, the concept of the heaven and earth conceit, and how that has religious connotations, of course, but it is also played in a way that it has the possibility of being interpreted in sort of religious connotations. It also has the possibility of being interpreted in terms of a type of transcendental quality, and also it has a way of being interpreted in terms of the application of cinema, the use of cinema tools to create various worlds. And I like that multi-level dimensionality to the way in which this structure conceit is applied. I think it's so genius, and it's done so very cleverly, and it's relying on things that make it so easy to access, seemingly simple, but which again makes for very easy understandability on the part of the viewer who's watching the film. And I think that's such a great strength of this film. Its ideas are so pronounced and so profound, and it is expressing them in a way that I think everyone can understand. So, so brilliant. And I should say, too, that it is, I mentioned the place of Berlin. Now, the place and the time is so important. We'll talk about Wim Wenders and some of his discussions in the supplements a little bit later in this video, excuse me. But he places such importance on the character and look and feel and place of Berlin. He places so much emphasis on, say, the sounds and tenors of the language, and that is his way of trying to perhaps indicate or create an avenue of real deep and sincere and very heartfelt ways in which we can, through his cinema, begin to try to get a sense of who these people are in a very direct and very intimate way. Who these people really, really are, what their concerns really, really are, what makes their hearts beat, and what makes them move in a way that is so intimate and personal and subjective to them and their lives. And I think that's a very beautiful way of handling it. And also take it on the macro level. This is Berlin in the late 1980s, and so we have to remember the context of history as we reach the end of the Cold War, and we have Germany, and we have Berlin in particular, having had its place throughout the history, not to mention recent 20th century history. And so we have that lived in, almost maybe weary, and perhaps in some areas run down, or in other areas a type of joie de vivre, or perhaps a mixture or a hybrid of the two, or perhaps something completely different indeed. So this is an inhabitant, this is an examination of inhabitants that are in, from all walks of life, all corners of society, yet all inhabiting the same place. And it's a place that is very rich with detail and experience. Also, it is a place that is filled with a lot of complexity and a lot of, say, deep-rooted connotations and connections with society, history, and culture. And so in that way, this film, Wings of Desire, is also a type of examination or discovery of this world of Berlin, a type of symphony, if you will, of the time and place. And so, among other things, it is not just a love story. It is not just a conceit, a cinematic conceit or metaphor application of the heaven and earth dynamic. It's not just an examination or exploration of human stories from the viewpoint of observing angels, but it also is a type of capturing of a place in a specific time or moment, a symphony or a celebration of a place in a given moment. So that is Berlin. And so for these and other reasons, I think this is a film, Wings of Desire, that is in so many things at once. And the surprises that await one when one watches this film, the delight and magic that of those moments is just, it just warms my heart to think about those. And that's one of the great things about this film, Wings of Desire. I mean, it has a way of being uplifting, but never losing sight of the human arc. And I mean that in a way that it really comes to, it really boils down to a lot of the details of lived-in experience, like being in a library or reading a book, or maybe going to a cafe, or having a piece of food, or smelling some coffee, or breathing in the air. And these are moments that I think are very universal, and I think everyone can understand. And yet at the same time, it is also speaking about the place and time, the concerns of the people living here, their jobs, their anxieties, their feelings about relationships, feelings of triumph and success, and also loss and tragedy, etc. Again, tied to their place here in 1980s Berlin, etc. So I love that balance between the universal and the contextual. And I love that balance between the very intimate and personal, and also the very almost grand and universal, as in the transcending space and time into almost the discussions of the infinite. But those discussions never lose sight of the human experience, and never lose sight of the intimate nature that we as viewers are privy to when we watch and experience and behold this great, great film, which is Wings of Desire. So Wings of Desire is back again in the Criterion Collection, and my goodness, what a beautiful, beautiful work this is from Wim Wenders, Wings of Desire. The Criterion Collection has re-released this film, Wings of Desire, and it is once again at spine number 490. What we have here is the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray presentation of the film. And so we have therefore two discs, one disc being the 4K disc, and the other disc, the second disc, being the Blu-ray disc. And this is in the plastic casing, and I've taken the liberty of removing the booklet that goes into the left-hand side of the plastic casing inner compartment, like so. But that's where the booklet goes, and it's a staple booklet, which is really, really lovely. And I'll speak a little bit about that later on in this video discussion. And I should, but let's speak now about the presentation itself. The 4K disc, or this new release, is based upon the 4K presentation or 4K restoration. And so let me read a little bit from the notes of the staple booklet about the materials that were the basis for this release. Wings of Desire is presented in the filmmaker's preferred aspect ratio of 1.66 to 1. The restoration on the 4K UHD disc was created and graded under the supervision of director Wim Wenders. The source material was Wim Wenders' Stiftung Theatrical 4K Restoration, undertaken in 2017 from the color and black and white 35mm original camera negatives using an Aeroscan film scanner at RE Media. The newly mixed 5.1 surround soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm original magnetic tracks and supervised by Wenders at Basis Berlin Post-Production. Digital restoration was carried out with the support of CNC. The restoration on the Blu-ray disc, also supervised by Wenders, was undertaken by the Criterion Collection in 2009 from a 35mm interpositive and a 35mm internegative scanned on a Spirit Datacine. The 2.0 surround soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm original magnetic track. And so what this means is we have, again, the Blu-ray, which is the earlier transfer from 2009, and that's also what we had earlier. And that Blu-ray is essentially carried over into the Blu-ray disc of this new two-disc release. But the other disc, the 4K disc, is using the 4K restoration, again described as being from the year 2017, with the 5.1 newly mixed soundtrack possibility or option, as described in the booklet which I've just read here. So what to make of this, and how does that make me feel, or how does that make one feel in terms of watching this film or rewatching the film, as the case may be, Wings of Desire? I must say, let me just cut to the chase. This is great. This 4K restoration and the look and the sound of it was great. Absolutely great. Let me speak to the soundtrack first. Now, this is described as a newly mixed 5.1, right, surround soundtrack. And I must say that I didn't notice anything, again, to my very limited capacity and my limited ability to detect these things, because I'm not in any way an expert. But I couldn't make out any noticeable huge differences in terms of the way this film sounded when I then watched the film on 4K. I have seen this film many, many times, relying, for instance, on the earlier Blu-ray release. But when I watched the 4K for the first time, I didn't notice anything that was so completely different. But I did have a sense of there's a way in which the sounds are, I don't know how to explain this. They feel, how to explain this? There's a way in which the soundtrack, I feel like it felt flatter when it needed to be flat, and it felt fuller when it needed to be fuller. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well, but there's a way in which the flatness of the film and the way the visual flatness of the film is purposely applied in order to create this effect of, say, heaven and earth. And I found that in some moments, I don't want to go into too much details again. I don't want to spoil some of the scenes for those who haven't yet seen this film, but there are some moments where I felt subtly that some of those moments of flatness felt really flat in a great way, and some of those moments of, say, fullness, let's say, to create the further sense of divide between heaven and earth, felt very full indeed. So I like that, maybe subtle pronouncement that you could detect, I think, here and there in the soundtrack, with still maintaining a sense of fidelity as to what I've been used to in terms of listening to this film as I've seen it many times before. So that's my take on the sound. I'm very impressed with it in that way. And then speaking of the visuals, I must say that this film, it looks so, how should I say, pristine on the one hand, and then also it feels very, it has that sense of almost the lived-in ruggedness on the other hand when we get to this divide between heaven and earth. Now, the Criterion Blu-ray from several years back, I think, had that sense very well, and so very well indeed. But I was, again, pardon me for my lack of expressing this with any type of technical expertise, because I have none. But I could sense with my viewing of the 4K, and I've seen it as of the time of this video recording, I've seen it 3 times in the 4K now. I really could get a sense of the great flatness of the black and white scenes when they needed to be flat, and I found that the sharpness of the contours, I think, really added to the sense of flatness in an interesting way. I mean, which I think is very important because it has the great sense of the photographic feel, and also a sense of the reservation of the limitations of observation, and also has a sense too of a type of sweep of history, in a manner of speaking, which is, I think, in great contrast with the sort of lived-in ruggedness of the color photography, which I think is so well pronounced all the way down to the type of feel of the grain when we get to the color photography. In other words, let me put it in another way. With this 4K, I could really get a sense of the color photography feeling in the context of the moment of the history of the time, late 1980s, whereas when I watch the black and white photography section, that feels timeless. And I never felt that before. Not to say that what we saw before wasn't great. This is great. This earlier Blu-ray is great, don't get me wrong, but there was something about the sharpness and contours on the one hand, and then the sort of the ruggedness of the color scenes on the other hand, that made me feel that contrast even more, which I thought was really great because it helped me to further enhance that sense of interpreting the film in terms of this great conceit of heaven and earth, and the similarities but also distinctions between the construct of heaven and the construct of earth. Again, construct in the context of the film, heaven being this almost timeless place but very distant, whereas earth being this lived-in place, but also part of the moment, part of the context, which is now many years after the fact. And that difference, I think, was felt for me, again, from my very limited subjective viewpoint, that was felt for me very much so in the 4K viewing of this. So that is my, I think, very long-winded way, maybe anecdotally, of trying to express just how much I very much enjoyed this 4K presentation, very, very much. And I think it is then, without a doubt, it is convinced me that this is definitely worth it. The 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release is definitely worth it. Again, not to knock the earlier Blu-ray, which is great. And if you have the earlier Blu-ray and if you're happy with this, that's great. So please continue to enjoy this. I think it's a great place to go. But for me, in my own subjective experience, when we talk about the differences between, quote unquote, is it worth it to get the 4K release if you already have the Blu-ray? For me, if I had to answer it, I of course I've made the purchase already, so perhaps what I'm about to say might be somewhat moot or irrelevant. But if I had to make the consideration all over again, should I go for the 4K purchase? With the knowledge that I know now, I would say for me, yes, it's definitely worth it. So I'm very, very happy with this, and I'm very impressed with this. And it's, again, it's just a wonderful further enhancement and great opportunity once again to just have fun and enjoy and be entertained and delighted by this work. Another great opportunity to do so with this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release from Criterion. And then continuing on with our discussion of this great release, Wings of Desire, let's move to the discussion of the supplements. And so what do we have here? So once again, let's remind ourselves that we have the 2 discs, the 4K disc and then the Blu-ray disc. And so the film is, of course, available to watch on either disc, with the Blu-ray presentation for the Blu-ray and then the new 4K restoration to be made available on the 4K UHD disc. And also for each disc, when you watch the film, in whatever option you choose, you can enjoy the film by listening into the commentary track, and this is from the year 2009, and this is with featuring the comments of Wim Wenders and Peter Falk, probably primarily Wim Wenders, although Peter Falk does have his comments that he makes there. And this is described as being interviews edited by Mark Rance, which is about totaling over 6 hours of interviews from 96 and 97, and then edited together in this format, which comprises or makes up this commentary track. And so in that way, too, the comments are then timed in a way that they emerged more or less in sync with what we're watching. So, for example, Peter Falk, I mentioned his comments. Maybe there are more occasions for Wim Wenders to speak during this commentary track than Peter Falk. That's not a dig against any of those two participants, but the point is that it's synced in a way that Peter Falk's comments are more or less appearing when there's a discussion of the actors or when Peter Falk's scenes emerge in the film. So, but that has a type of natural progression of the commentary track. So I think it's organized very well. And so in this commentary track, which is great, by the way, I mean, we get so many little insights and details as to the making of this film, the genesis of this film, and the idea and the way this film was came about in terms of the writing process. I mean, Wim Wenders speaks to about being away from being away from Germany, and then also having a sense of longing, and specifically thinking about Berlin, and also thinking not just about Berlin, but also thinking about the tenor and the rhythms of speech, and also of the German language through poetry and the like, and literature, and how that informed his desire to want to make a film, maybe centering in on Berlin and the place, which again he says always held a very fascinating, he had this huge level of fascination for the place of Berlin. And so in this process, and through a number of circumstances about other productions that may or may not have been able to go through at the time, he ended up focusing in on writing certain stories or scenarios that ended up being the assembly or basis of assembly of Wings of Desire. But it wasn't in a way like a quote-unquote traditionally realized script, but rather it was a sense of feelings or ideas that were then added to and added to and added to, even to the point where even in the editing room, certain permutations and changes were made, such as the application of voiceover, the choice, etc. So this type of, and the idea too of the evolution and growth of the concept of the use of angels in the story, and then also how you'd have their interactions with certain characters, and then the Domartin character, the Peter Falk character, and how those emerged, etc. So the way in which this film essentially came about through an assemblage of ideas and feelings and thoughts that were then slowly but surely emerging through this interesting writing process of Wim Wenders and Hanke and others. And this is one of the fascinating aspects of the creative process, and it's done in a quote-unquote non-traditional way, I think, but it's really fascinating stuff indeed. And he mentions the sort of the way in which this was assembled together, his work with Peter Hanke, the work with story editor Richard Rettinger, and we have then the creation of this work, the story that is Wings of Desire, which ended up becoming something that he wanted to essentially promote to people like Peter Falk. And Peter Falk, when he mentions reading the script, he was he mentions about this type of impression that he had and being surprised by this and the like. And indeed, I think that's a really great reaction, because again, it shows the sort of personality that Peter Falk has. And this is very important because of the role that Peter Falk plays in the film. Indeed, I think that's a really great mirroring. And in terms of making of the film, there's also comments about the great work of the director of photography, Henri Alequin, And this is, again, very important in the way that the film structures itself in terms of the heaven and earth concept, and then how that has to have a visual motif linkage in terms of the use of the black and white photography and the color photography. Oh my goodness, it's great. And so the work with the director of photography, a legend in the director of photography world. And this cannot be stated enough. I think it's very important, and we'll indeed get to more discussions of the work of Henri Alecan when we get to other aspects of the supplements. But and we have also very important themes and discussions about the circus and flying, how flying becomes a very important concept or motif both in heaven and also on earth, and also working with the actors too. So for Domertan, Wim Wenders talking about the nature of her performance in terms of the trapeze artist or circus artist work, and how this she really got into the role in a very in terms of her physicality as well, which is much to be admired, of course. And then working in terms of the great performances by Bruno Ganz and others, and also the contribution of Claire Denis, Claire Denis and her contribution, among other things, the participation of Peter Falk, and also we have the sense of Berlin, and the way in which Berlin is depicted in this film. Again, a symphony or a celebration or a real exploration. And indeed, you have to remember too the timing that this takes place. The late 1980s, close to the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and this idea of uncertainty in the air, which I think you really get a sense of. This uncertainty, which is linked to a very close connection, right, between society, culture, and history. A crossroads, a real crossroads, and I think crossroads is a very important word too, because you see it in the macro historical level, but you also get a sense of it in the macro historical level, but you also get a sense of it directly with the story because of the crossroads between heaven and earth. Oh, it's brilliant. So the for these and other reasons, I think this is a great commentary track to go. And oh my goodness, there's so much thought, so much care, and so much humanity that is on display when thinking about how this film was made, or hearing about the stories about how this film was made, including listening to the great commentary tracks. So it's great. It's really great. It's a commentary track that we had seen again in the earlier release, but having it carried over here for this 2023 re-release is wonderful. So if you haven't watched the film with the commentary track yet, now's your chance, because it is definitely worth it. And then continuing on with our discussion, let's focus in on the supplements. So as I mentioned, this is the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray. So it has the 4K disc, and then it has the Blu-ray disc. And so the supplements will be found on the Blu-ray disc of this release. So if you want to go to the supplements, put the Blu-ray disc into the player, and much like the earlier Blu-ray disc from several years back, we have this, I understand, the same supplements being carried over. So it's essentially it's what you got on the earlier Blu-ray disc, you're going to get now with this Blu-ray disc that is in this re-release. So, but what we got before is great. So let's dig in briefly as to what we're getting again now. So first up is the sort of 43-minute making of documentary. Brad Silberg's 43 minutes. This is The Angels Among Us from 2003. And here we have sit-down interviews and some photos and stills and some other excerpts of video, etc. Again, focusing in on the making of this work, Wings of Desire, focusing, for example, on some of the aspects of the inspiration of Wim Wenders of this work. Again, the idea of capturing a sense of maybe German language and the spirit of art and literature and poetry, and also combining that with the concept of the heaven and earth visual symbols and the cinematic treatments thereof, the idea of having angels as being among our main characters, And it's described as a conglomerate of ideas, and that's part of the way in which this film, as we mentioned earlier, was mapping itself out as it was being essentially created out of whole, fresh cloth, in a manner of speaking. And the idea too about an angel wanting to be a human being, and that has, I think, this appeal that I think anyone can understand, and this way in which we as viewers want to root for our heroes. I think this is also something that's very, very exciting indeed. The writing process is mentioned here. Also, this concept or this phrase, the urgency of love, which I think is a really lovely way of putting it. And also working with the actors and the actors' their comments. So Otto Sander and Bruno Ganz. And the idea too of the black and white and the color photography, the contributions of Peter Falk and others. Solveig Domartin is celebrated and praised for really getting into the role. To the point of risking injury because of, again, the physicality that the role demanded, and the circus trapeze artist aspect of her character. And then the way in which, again, the cinematic stylings are applied, again, to further enhance this structure of heaven and earth. And Wim Wenders also mentions, too, that from his vantage point, it was probably, relatively speaking, a kind of... It was a surprise in terms of the way in which there was so much critical and popular success that this film met upon its initial release, and then beyond up to now. I mean, it's a hugely, hugely popular film, and so he describes it. He describes it as being him feeling very pleasantly surprised by this, and so overall, this is a really, really great making of documentary. It's from 2003, but its comments, I think, still ring true, and it really goes into the heart of a lot of the areas and perspectives of the behind the scenes and production of the film, and giving us a sense of why this film is really as great as it is. So, The Angels Among Us, approximately 43 minutes. And next up is a 9-minute Cinema. Wim Wenders, Berlin, January 87. This is described as being from February 17th, 1987. So this is another assembly of sort of behind the scenes or sort of observational workings. Wim Wenders on this time, Henri Alekan, etc. So this is approximately 9 minutes French from February 17th, 1987. Cinema. So please then check this out if you can. And then next up we have an assembly of deleted scenes and outtakes. The deleted scenes have a audio commentary possibility, and then the outtakes are shown with sort of music overlaid on the soundtrack. So 32 minutes and then 6 minutes. And so I would probably... I hesitate to speak about the specifics of the outtakes and the deleted scenes because I think I don't want to risk ruining some of the plot points that are associated with those deleted scenes in the context of the main film. Again, for the benefit of those of you who have not yet seen this great film, but so I will just say right now that the deleted scenes have a very interesting way of, again, expanding the world, and then the outtakes to again, a further insight into the sort of making of process, and so it's a wonderful delight to have. So the deleted scene section, the outtakes section, excuse me. And then next we have, in terms of the supplements, a gallery, which is kind of like this gallery presentation, totaling 47 chapters overall. And so we have a number of stills and title card explanatory notes along the way. So again, more insight. Again, this idea too of capturing the world and the photography and the context. I think it's captured very well. So it's really great to have this again carried over. So please check that out if you can. And then I mentioned Henri Alekan, the director of photography. And next up we have a number of supplements focusing on Alekan's work. First is a 10-minute segment, Alekan 85, and this is from 1985. And this is speaking to Alekan's work and real foundational, groundbreaking work with a lot of iconic landmark milestone classics of cinema leading up to Wings of Desire. And this is from 85, so this is before Wings of Desire, which was in 87. So here he's getting a sense of the depth and scope and impact of and importance of Henri Alecan's work, such as, for example, Beauty and the Beast. So, again, to emphasize the importance, I mean, this is true for any film, of course, but here is a great way to get a sense of the work of the director of photography and the history and the career of Alecan, and him bringing this history in his contributions to Wings of Desire, and the reason this among the many reasons why Wim Wenders wanted to work with him in the first place. So there's that supplement, and then Alecan La Lumière, 1985 documentary, aired on French TV, and this is 27 minutes, and here we have more insights and more opportunities to observe sort of the working mechanisms, and also the sort of processes behind the scenes, or setups and the like, and the camera handling and the lighting, etc. So here we have more of the again, the observation of the photography process of Alecan. So this is, again, very important and great reminder of emphasis as to the importance and of the contribution of Alecan in terms of Wim Wenders' work, Wings of Desire in 87, but also the scope of Alecan's career and its impact on really landmark milestone examples of cinema. So Alecan La Lumière, when more reminders of the greatness of Lumière, greatness of Alecan, Lumière, and then Alecan, of course, Henri Alecan, the director of photography of Wings of Desire. Then continuing on, we have Remembrance, which is described as being excerpts from this is 1982 film excerpts totaling 29 minutes. And this is Bruno Ganz and Otto Sander, who are the two stars of Wings of Desire, and they are playing the angels, Damiel and Castiel, respectively. And here we have their, say, remembrances or a type of homage, or maybe portrait, a loving portrait, or dedication to Kurt Bois, who is one of the actors who's featured in the film Wings of Desire. So here we have a type of playing tribute to the work and presence and overall life of Kurt Bois, who, again, in the context of the film Wings of Desire in 87, he'll play the character who's Homer. But yes, very fascinating too. Again, this is wonderful in a number of ways. Of course, the getting to learn about the background and history and life of Kurt Bois, and also getting to get a sense of this from the vantage point of fellow actors, Bruno Ganz and Otto Sander, and also reminding us about their connections with the later work that would be Wings of Desire as well. And also there's this idea of the observational at work, and so it's interesting to get the sense of the two actors observing, paying tribute to and observing this actor from Kurt Bois, and they're also observing him in a way much like the angels would observe his character, in the film some years later. So that parallel is very fascinating. But here is a set of these excerpts, Remembrance. Very, very fascinating stuff indeed. So approximately 29 minutes. And then the supplements round themselves out with trailers. Trailers described as being the German theatrical trailer, and then another one which I think is so cool, so clever, Wim Wenders promo. So that rounds out the supplements that can be found with the Blu-ray portion of this 4K UHD Blu-ray combo from Criterion. Once again, it's what we had seen earlier with the Blu-ray release from several years back. So to my knowledge, I don't think we're getting anything new, but that's okay. That's okay, because what we're getting in terms of the commentary track and these great supplements found on the Blu-ray disc, what we're getting is great. It's really great. On top of which, we're getting the opportunity of watching this, say, on the 4K restoration. So it's a total package, wonderful release. So would it have been nice to have something new? Of course. It's always nice to get the opportunity to listen to a new commentary, or to listen to a new interview, or another documentary or something. That would have been great, but I don't think it's in any way any type of deal breaker in the slightest that there is nothing new that's included for this new release, because what we got before is great. So we're getting that again here. So if you haven't had a chance to watch any of these or listen to the commentary track, now's your opportunity, because it's really wonderful. And now, to conclude our conversation here, let's talk about some comments or observations that we might have about the packaging and the booklet and the like. So this is, as I say, the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release. It's in this plastic casing, and it has two discs, excuse me. So when you open it up, it has this layering mechanism, which we have seen in many a plastic case 2-disc release from Criterion, and the inside of the cover, or inside of the casing, looks like so. And this is the inside of the earlier Blu-ray release from several years back. So if we were to put a little bit of comparison here, that's what the new release today looks like, and that's what the earlier release looked like before. So if you see here, the earlier release has this slightly lighter gray color to the disc, whereas this is the 4K disc, and here is the Blu-ray disc for the new 2023 release. So the Blu-ray disc and the 4K disc have a type of slightly darker shade to them, darker gray element to it. I would say the 4K UHD disc has a blacker tone, and the Blu-ray for the 2023 release is slightly lighter in tone, but still a darker shade of gray, whereas the Blu-ray from earlier is a lighter shade of gray. So that's an interesting detail, I think. Now, in terms of other details, I would say that the cover art it's pretty much carrying over what we saw in the earlier Blu-ray, now in this 2023 release. Pardon me for the glare. I hope you can forgive me. So that's the way it looks there. I should point out just a couple of interesting details, again, just for your information. First up is, I would say that if you can see, this is the earlier Blu-ray, and as an example, it has black and white motifs, and it's really lovely. But sometimes it has, say, the use of gray colored font. And sometimes the gray color font is somewhat light in tone, much like the light gray of the Blu-ray disc color itself, such that sometimes it's a little bit hard to make out when you're reading it. I would point out here, this is the Blu-ray of, and I hope you can see it. I apologize for the bad, maybe out of focus, but that's the Blu-ray, the earlier Blu-ray, how the gray font of the spine number looked at the bottom there. It's hard to make out, I apologize. But now I'm holding here on this side, there we go. Let's try that. There we go. That's the new Blu-ray or 4K UHD. Can you see that? On this side, we have the 4K UHD, the 2023 release with 490. And on this side, we have the earlier Blu-ray from several years back. And you can tell the earlier Blu-ray, the way that 490 looks, it has that lighter gray tint to it that actually makes it a little bit harder to read. Now, 2023's release, it's a little bit darker, which actually makes it easier to read. So I like that detail. And in fact, you can get that sense here. The earlier Blu-ray, this text is in that light gray motif, whereas the newer release, which is right here, you can kind of see that it's a little bit more pronounced and it's a little bit easier to read than the earlier light gray text that was used in the Blu-ray from several years back. So that's a little difference right there I could point out. The other difference I would say too is, it's again very, very minor detail, but what was it? The spelling, I think there's a spelling error that was on the earlier Blu-ray disc at the back cover, at least as far as I could tell. And in terms of the write-up, it mentions the phrase Berlin Wall, the Berlin Wall. But the word wall, the W in the word wall was not capitalized in the Blu-ray write-up that I have here, whereas in the new 4K plus UHD combo, it has Berlin Wall with the W being capitalized. So that's something to account for, I'm sure. And let's see, there was another difference that I wanted to mention here, which was I want to say that there was, oh yes, one other thing too, which I thought was interesting, which is, and again, these are very, very minor things, but okay. Once again, let me just put it like this. So, there we go. I apologize for my poor, there we go. So on this side, this is the Blu-ray, and on this side, this is the 4K. Let me do it like this, actually. There we go. Sorry about that. I mix it up. I'm so bad with this. I apologize. So here is the 4K, and here is the Blu-ray. Okay, and as you can see, the 4K on this side, the way that the words "Wings of Desire" are positioned on the spine, it's a little bit more centered in the sort of dark gray area. Whereas on this side, which is the Blu-ray from several years back, "Wings of Desire" is actually off-centered in a way that the word "desire" is almost touching the white clouds. You see that? That's an interesting little difference. So once again, "Wings of Desire" on this side, the new 4K UHD combo has the title more centered on the spine in the gray area, whereas on the earlier Blu-ray from several years back, it wasn't. It was slightly off-center. So again, that's another little difference. Maybe a correction, I don't know, that Criterion made on the occasion of this new 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release. But very cool stuff, indeed. Very cool. I mean, I love the cover art. I love this overall concept. Really wonderful stuff. Art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, and menu and package design Michael Boland. So well done for being able to do that. Now, going to the booklet. This is the new booklet, or the booklet for the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release, and this is the booklet from the earlier Blu-ray release. So essentially identical, or almost identical, practically identical, and identical with a few very, very minor differences, but they are identical in the sense that they have the same number of pages. There is some slight difference in terms of a discussion of the presentations, of course, but that's to be expected. But the writings are still intact, and they are great writings. There's the Peter Handke Song of Childhood, which is almost like a type of a poem. And then there's the essay, Michael Atkinson essay, Watch the Skies. And so those two writings that were in the earlier Blu-ray disc booklet, which is right here, are now carried over into the new releases booklet, and they are wonderful. And again, for the most part, I should say that everything is intact. We have all the pictures that were there, and the stills, which is really lovely. The stable booklet, so bravo to Criterion for being able to stick with the stable booklet. I wish Criterion could do this for all of its releases, but it's great that Criterion didn't change this aspect. If I were to point out just a couple of very, very minor and interesting differences, for example, in the earlier Blu-ray booklet on page, 2 and 3, this is what page 2 and 3 looks like. Look at that still that's used. Here is the chapters, and here is the cast and crew listing on this page. So that's the earlier Blu-ray booklet. And then here we have 2 and 3, but this is the 4K UHD and Blu-ray booklets, a new book. So take a look at that. First of all, you can tell that the chapter listing, which is on the earlier Blu-ray booklet, is not to be found on this new release booklets. That's, I think, a trend that we've seen in recent re-releases. But also look at the still that's being used. It's the same still, I think, but it's, or the same, or similar, almost exactly the same moment, but there's a slight difference in the way it looks there. So that's one difference that should be interesting to note. And then another interesting note is, let's say, this is the on the earlier Blu-ray booklet on page 26. We have the write-up of the transfer details for the earlier Blu-ray, and then on the same corresponding page for the new booklet, we have the same still that's being used, but the write-up is different. Here it's a little bit smaller on this side. It's a little bit smaller, but because of that, you actually can see more of the still that's used in the background, which I think is an interesting detail right there. And then finally, on the final page, or the final pages, see this this image that's used in the background here. If you look at the image, this is from the earlier Blu-ray booklet. It's almost exactly the same image that's used for the new release booklet, but it's slightly different. Slightly different. I don't know if you can tell the way that his head and hand are angled. Here is slightly different from it looks here, but it's for all intents and purposes, essentially the same moment. So again, just in case you're interested in that. But in any event, yes, the booklet is more or less practically the same as what we got before, and it's really great. So that is in my just 2 cents when it comes to this new release by Criterion of Wings of Desire, now employing the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray format, relying on the 4K restoration for the 4K, which is great, by the way. And for me, it is definitely worth getting the 4K for that. But once again, if you have the Blu-ray and you're happy with the Blu-ray, please continue to be happy with the Blu-ray, because it is wonderful in many respects. And it is indeed, too, either option that you choose, my dear friends, is a great way to, once again, jump into this world, this magical, this brilliant, this wonderfully realized world of Wim Wenders and company, that is Wings of Desire. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. And so until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.